Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Furman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, NFL Week 2, Monday Night Football edition. And the NFL is the one league that never disappoints. Week 2 lived up to the expectations and then some. I'm your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, some pretty interesting results Week 2 as we have another data point for the majority of the teams.
Wild week again. Some late craziness. A lot of endgame variance that's going on right now in this league.
And a lot of inept coaching, which I'm sure we'll hit on early on in this show with the good, the bad, and the ugly. For those folks just tuning in for the Monday Night Football edition, that's where we'll start things off. A little discussion of look-ahead lines, a special segment that I think all of you guys will enjoy later on in the show. And, of course, a full breakdown of the Vikings at the Eagles. For those folks looking for the Bills-Titans breakdown, we actually covered that on the Thursday podcast. So, Payne, with so much ground to cover, we may as well get into the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'm going to let you lead off with the good because we are positive people around these parts.
I don't know if it's all good for us and our listeners, but it was certainly good for the Miami Dolphins. Tua in the comeback. I think that's where we have to start here. I don't know if Miami makes a playoff run. They certainly have some holes. It'd be nice to get the secondary healthy, but I think if you're a fan of the Dolphins, there's at least some excitement around the team. This has really been an offense that's impossible to watch or rally around since the Dan Marino days. So it's good to see a little oomph, a little punch. I mean, I don't know if there was a team that could have come from behind, as I think about the Dolphins the last 2 decades, an offense that could pull that off that they've had. I don't know. And you look at Tua, a guy that we thought would make improvements with an offensive-minded head coach that was built on creating separation with an accurate quarterback. And right now, Tua wakes up this morning with the second best QBR through 2 games against Belichick in the Ravens defense. Miami has the first trio of teammates to score at least 35 fantasy points in the same game since the 2009 Patriots when Brady Moss and the now Dolphins receiver coach Wes Welker accomplished that. So that was pretty interesting. But you look at Miami across the board yesterday. You saw the change in Mostert now getting most of the carries. They were very good. 2nd in EPA per rush, 5th in EPA per pass. The team number 1 overall on the week thus far. And what's interesting to me is how that game, I don't know if you watched it, Todd, but the vibe and feel of the game changed. Like, sure, you get Duvernay to return the opening kick, and you're like, Jesus, come on, this is ridiculous. You can't really predict something like that. But if you remove it from the memory bank, the pace is a snail to start that game. Lots of running. Just a physical game that's being played in a phone booth. Without the return touchdown, we're sitting at 0-0 at the 14-minute mark of the second quarter with Miami backed up on their own 3-yard line. And then, poof, from that point forward, both teams saw what each other were trying to do, and it was just a fireworks show.
Yeah, you saw a lot of skill on display there. I mean, to your point, you get the stop from the Miami Dolphins on the 4th and goal, the fumble from Lamar Jackson, and then the Dolphins put together a march going down the field. Would have loved that to take 10 minutes off the clock as well. The Ravens, of course, get the football back. Rashad Bateman, 75-yard touchdown, and they were off to the races. You mentioned what kind of fantasy production you got from a trio of Dolphins. Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle become the first pair of teammates in NFL history with 10-plus receptions, 150-plus receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns in the same game. So little to say to further substantiate your point. Defensive coordinators across the league will not relish trying to slow this team down if Tua continues to mature as a starting quarterback. This game I actually want to hit on twice because I want to highlight the positive and I want to attack the negative. But I have to give the Jets credit, especially their rookies in terms of overall contributions. Garrett Wilson, 100-yard day, rebounded from a critical drop to have the game-winning touchdown reception. Breece Hall showed an ability as an explosive runner to get through contact and catch balls. Sauce Gardner He's not a lockdown corner at this level yet, but his willingness to go in and make tackles, you can feel that the talent level for the Jets are better. They still may not be buttoned up by any stretch of the imagination, but a big win for a team that's something we hadn't seen historically for a nearly 3,000 game sample size.
There's some talent there, and you have to show some talent when you have that many draft picks. But yes, Breece Hall looks like he's getting acclimated a little bit better. I still like Carter. I don't know why everyone's trying to transition to Breece right away. Carter's got some punch to him. He's versatile, but Breece out of the backfield was fantastic. Garrett Wilson had a massive drop a few drives before that would have extended a drive, but he makes up for it with the game-winning catch. I think you look at Joe Flacco. Is he the best quarterback? No, but he's a Super Bowl winner. He's a professional. He's going to be well studied. He's still got a big enough arm to make all of the throws. And I thought he showed quite well yesterday, even prior to the late game heroics. And I understand that we're going to look at that game and be like, boy, the Jets got lucky. But if you watch that game from box to wire, this was the start of the fourth quarter. The Jets are driving down 3. Carter rips off a run down the sideline. It should be first and goal from about the 3 or 4 yard line, and the refs call a phantom hold. Jets ended up having to settle for a field goal, tied it at 17. That was a game they should have been within the number the entire way, and then obviously they weren't late due to some late game end variance, but fortunately I think the right side ended up covering would be my assessment there, even though there was some nuttiness late that I know you want to touch on.
Yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to with the Browns and where you want to point fingers in that locker room in the Monday morning meetings, but I still want to stay on the positive. And I think one team that you told our listeners was going to be a lot more explosive offensively this year than a lot of people believed. Hard Knocks created all sorts of buzz, but Payne, the Detroit Lions, went out there and they look like the greatest thing since sliced bread with their ability to control the line of scrimmage.
Huge first win of the season for Campbell and the Lions. And take nothing away from Detroit. Washington's a bad football team right now. The O-line isn't very good. The defense is one of the most overrated units in this entire league. And, there was some O-line injury concerns middle of the week for Detroit. Some of those guys did end up missing the game, and that's why we saw Washington get steamed a little bit. But it was the flat-out wrong side. I thought the Lions' defense was fantastic in the first half. Aiden Hutchinson, 3 sacks in the opening stanza, held Washington to a 14% success rate and a negative 0.55 EPA per play in the first half. Offensively, though, Goff was willing to push the ball downfield. 8.6 intended air yards per pass attempt. That was 9th highest of the week thus far before Monday Night Football. And that was something we've kind of given Goff some mocked him a little bit for. He just refused to push the ball downfield. Did this week. We saw Christian Kirk dominate Washington in the slot week 1. St. Brown torched him again in week 2, 3.4 yards per route run, tack on another 68 rushing yards for St. Brown. And the Lions created a ton of push on the ground, right? Again, going back to the offensive line injuries for Detroit, which caused some midweek steam on Washington, but on non-Goff runs, there were 22 of them. The Lions' O-line that was beaten and battered created 137 yards before first contact. So this was just an all-out effort, box-to-wire win for Detroit here.
And I'm on Ross St. Brown, the sun god, you can call him whatever you want. 8+ receptions now, Payne, in 8 straight games, ties an NFL record held by Antonio Brown back in 2014 and Michael Thomas in 2019. Enters a little bit of rarefied air, a player that I know you and I joked about watching him last preseason, saying, man, I'm surprised the Lions can't get him more involved. It took him about 10 to 12 games last year, and suddenly this guy has become an absolute superstar, especially for the scheme. I had one other good thing I wanted to highlight, but want to give you the floor and make sure that we don't miss out on any things that caught your eye.
Well, he's also, going back to St. Brown, 1 touchdown away, I believe, from setting the franchise record for consecutive games with a touchdown. Him and Calvin Johnson are tied at 6 games. Let's see if he can get another one in this upcoming week. I have to give some love to Trevor Lawrence, Christian Kirk, and the Jaguars. 24-0 as a 3-point underdog. That's impressive. And the wide open throws that, to much to our chagrin, Trevor Lawrence missed in week 1. He made all of them in week 2. Completion percentage, 9% over expectation. That was the second best mark of the week. Jacksonville's offense before garbage time was second in EPA per play, 53% down-to-down success, and through the air, 69% success rate for Jacksonville against that Colts defense. Christian Kirk might not be your traditional number one, but we outlined him a bunch this offseason. He's fantastic in his role, and that's in the slot, dominating, caught every single target, averaged 13 yards per target with 2 touchdowns. Total team effort. Jacksonville's defense was the best in EPA per play allowed and success rate allowed. They pressured Matt Ryan. They turned him over 3 times. So an all-out great effort from the Jacksonville Jaguars.
The lesser-told story about the professor getting the best of his pupil, Doug Peterson exacting a measure of revenge for all those folks that said Frank Reich was responsible for that Eagles Super Bowl run way back when. So the Indianapolis Colts continue to struggle and struggle mightily when they go down to North Florida. Last but not least for me, it came in a loss, but what I've seen from the Falcons through the first 2 weeks has actually opened my eyes. I know they had to erase a massive deficit. They were the beneficiary of a big play on special teams. Arthur Smith had this team in a position to win the game late before Jalen Ramsey comes away with a timely interception. But when you look at Atlanta, a far cry from what we saw last year. The team's showing fight. They continue to be buttoned up. Would have been easy to quit when you go down 3 touchdowns. You have that momentum-changing touchdown before the half. But the Falcons are going to be a difficult out, at least from what I've seen early on. They're out there fighting. It's a young team. Now, I would like to see Arthur Smith free Kyle Pitts, but Drake London has exceeded expectations through his first 2 games, the rookie out of USC.
I'm a Drake London guy. All you guys were concerned about his speed. I think he's a good receiver. But yes, I don't know what's going on with Kyle Pitts. Arthur Smith needs to remove him from purgatory and get him fired up a little bit. You don't want to be down 28-3 under 4 minutes to go in the third quarter on the road. That's typically not a good equation. You blew the lead last week at home to New Orleans, who looked horrific this week. But praise Atlanta. They never quit. 17 points over the final 8 minutes to cover the 10-point spread. And the one thing we did at least see, Arthur Smith this week was animated in his midweek presser, his post-game presser last week, and said, we're going to get this thing figured out. The guys believe in us. They play really hard. And we did at least see that on display. We know how fired up their defensive coordinator was this offseason with comments about turning their defense into, old school Baltimore, old school Belichick defenses. Eventually, you have to win some games. The rah-rah stuff only works for so long before the locker room stops believing.
Just not a good roster. I think that's the biggest problem they have. And of course, one of their more winnable games they'll see on the docket this week, albeit their second straight game on the road against Seattle. Should be a fascinating watch to see which of those teams can be more buttoned up and if Atlanta can finally get their first win of the season in week 3. From the good, though, we have the bad, Payne, and there's so many different directions to go. I mean, while we praise Jacksonville, and rightfully so, the Colts, I mean, this is a team from an offensive line to Matt Ryan. Yes, they're down weapons, but that was the definition of an uninspired effort from the opening kickoff for the better part of 60 minutes. They just didn't look like they had any answers or adjustments to combat what Jacksonville was doing.
They didn't, and it's not a great football team right now. The offensive line is not as good as perception. We know some of the pieces they've been missing over the years. You're starting a tackle that's probably not a tackle. We knew their weaponry wasn't the best. We were kind of banging the table for them to add another piece this offseason. And so when you lose a Michael Pittman, things get a little bit bleak there. Defensively, we know DeForest Buckner was banged up. Kenny Moore was banged up. Shaq Leonard still did not play. So that was partly the angle on this game. It was just a beaten and battered unit that we didn't think was overly deep. And now you're heading into Florida where you've struggled, but it's extremely humid, and they just didn't seem to get off the bus.
No, they did not, and Frank Reich obviously won't have it much easier this weekend when you get Andy Reid and the Kansas City Chiefs with extra time to prepare. We'll get to that game in the look-ahead lines and see exactly what that number has done based on adding another data point to the Colts resume. From a bad standpoint, there's so many different directions to go. I want to get your take in terms of what stood out to you in a negative fashion for week 2.
So I actually think there's a good transition here from good to bad, and we can touch on both a little bit, but I thought that the Cowboys defense was good. The Bengals offense appears to be in shambles. So I think you want to give guys like Micah Parsons a defensive game ball more than a 25% pass rush win rate against Cincinnati. Dan Quinn certainly came up with the perfect game plan to negate the Bengals' explosiveness. Joe Burrow did have the third lowest completed air yards of any quarterback in week 2, fifth lowest intended air yards per pass. Completion percentage was 5% below expectation. And so give the Cowboys some credit, but we absolutely must include the Bengals in the bad. There is something going on with this offense, and it stinks. It's basically a combination of below average pass blocking in front of Joe Burrow. And I don't want to say this because I think it can get turned around. But Joe Burrow is not playing to the perceived vibe and persona he gives off forward facing. Joe Burrow shook right now. There is some bad tape out there right now from this Cowboys game. Joe Burrow has happy feet. He's sensing pressure before it ever gets there. He's panicking on certain dropbacks. He's not setting his feet. The pocket management isn't great. The protection schemes are not helping. Lots of new
Parsons
starters.
is a free runner. You and I could have had the sack that was circulating throughout social media.
Yeah. There are just a ton of new starters up front, and they are not a cohesive unit right now. They're not quite working in concert. And after the game, Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase had some things to say, right? Teams are going to keep playing us in soft zone until we prove we can beat them that way, Joe Burrow said. And then Jamar Chase chimed in. We need to learn to make more adjustments in game. Everybody knows what we're going to do, so everyone knows what to expect when we play you. It's on you, Zach Taylor. These are the nicest direct shots that can be sent to you from your superstars.
We talk about it all the time that the Kansas City Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, you have the utmost confidence they were going to be able to adjust. They were going to come back in 2022 with a much different game plan, the structure of their team under Brett Veach, and do the things they needed to force defenses to adjust. We have been widely critical of Zach Taylor in this first season. I think a lot of Bengals fans love the idea of dancing on our grave when he takes them on the improbable run last year. Guess what? You have Joe Burrow. You have a ton of weapons. I hope Bengals fans are happy with the long-term deal that they gave Zach Taylor to see what kind of coach he really will be going forward. A Coach Payne that disappointed me, he got his team a win. It didn't exceed odds makers' expectations, would be Nathaniel Hackett. And it's something I don't think I've ever seen in the National Football League. With a team that won a football game, you have the entire stadium in Denver counting down the play clock to make sure there's not a delay of game, and the game management was a little bit better for the Broncos. It's something you see in college basketball with a young point guard out there as a floor general, not with a Hall of Fame quarterback under center. The Broncos win 16-9, but I have absolutely no clue what's going on with Nathaniel Hackett and his game management.
And it started Monday night against Seattle. And I know that's the low-hanging fruit, but the one thing that we had said, come into the press conference, tell everyone you fucked up, and just move on. And initially, he did not. He dug in. And then Monday morning, someone must have given him the obvious data, and he apologized. But it continued this week. The team looks very unorganized. And there was multiple times that his ineptitude came out. He's not decisive. You can just tell he's not completely comfortable being the man yet, right? Calling plays and managing the game. It's very difficult to do all of that. And even in the third quarter, there was a situation where it was 3rd and short, and Javonte Williams was running hard. Let's just kind of give him the ball, pick up the first down. We're outside of the green zone. If we don't pick it up, we'll go for it on 4th down pretty easily. They run some trick play to the wide side of the field with a slow tight end that gets stopped for about a 2-yard loss. And so now it's 4th and 3. And Russ is, again, lining up like they're going to go for it. And it looked like Nathaniel Hackett grabs his play sheet and he's about to call a play. And then all of a sudden you see the special teams unit fly out onto the field. But it was too late. Does he use one of his timeouts? No. He takes a delay of game and then elects not to take a 59-yard field goal at elevation, but he was quite happy attempting a game winner from 64 at sea level 5 days prior. I don't know what's going on there.
The worst part about that is when McManus goes through from 54 yards, the kick would have been good from 70. Like, did that
Let's kick the thing out of the stadium.
Yeah, did that discourage you from kicking it again? I can't even wrap my head around it. And if this is is what we're going to see game in, game out from the Broncos. Good luck competing in that division. Of course, the Broncos will take center stage on Sunday Night Football against the new-look San Francisco 49ers, and you've already seen that line move considerably. In some shops, the 49ers are actually a 1-point road favorite. Last, as far as the bad, before we get to the ugly.
Hey, one thing I do want to say, because
sure.
I know we're kind of piling on the Broncos there. This is a new system. It's going to take some time. It's the complete opposite system than what Russ has ever been in. We did see this transition a little bit early on with even Aaron Rodgers in this system. That's not what we're bashing, right? We understand the incompetence that's transpired inside the 10-yard line offensively, the fumbles. Those things are going to regress. Eventually, the offense is going to look a little bit more in tune and free-flowing, and obviously Jerry Jeudy left early, and KJ Hamler did not play. We're specifically speaking to Nathaniel Hackett looking overwhelmed in decision-making. That's basically what we're discussing.
And here's the deal. It's only his second game as a head coach. So, yes, we're piling on. I think for the Broncos, somewhere along the way, you're going to see a tipping point. The light bulb's going to go on. If it doesn't for Nathaniel Hackett, well, shame on him. But once it does, there is significant talent on that roster. Russ will get more comfortable, to your point, leading the offense, and the betting market may be slow to respond. I just don't know when that day ultimately will befall them. Meanwhile, the Carolina Panthers, losers now of 9 straight games, extend the longest active losing streak in the NFL. The Panthers are now 10-25 under Matt Rule. They've lost 16 games by a single possession. Yesterday, I mean, when you hold the New York Giants to 19 points, somewhere along the way, you have to make plays. And Carolina, for seemingly the 100th time, isn't able to get over the hump, and they lose the game by a field goal despite taking very real professional money on game day that took them from a slight underdog into a slight road favorite role.
They did take some money from, +2, 2.5, and closed -1 in some spots. That was the game. You needed to go out there offensively and prove you could move the ball. And I understand it was the Giants' home opener. Wink Martindale urged the fans all week to become the 12th man. It was loud in there, but there were just a lot of opportunities missed for this offense. And I actually was not running to bet Carolina this season, but all of a sudden you started to hear some good things coming out of there, how they're much more organized, how everyone was getting along, their roles were better defined. Matt Rule didn't have to babysit all of the positional group coaches. He could focus on certain things. And I think we all anticipated seeing a Carolina offense that finished the game extremely strong against Cleveland in week 1. Baker Mayfield had the perfect fourth quarter. We assumed some of that would translate to this week, and it just didn't.
Yeah, there wasn't a whole heck of a lot. The only silver lining is that Baker Mayfield realized DJ Moore is actually a receiver on his football team and could get him the ball in space. But a little bit disappointing for Carolina. We'll see how they bounce back with a pivotal division game as short home underdogs against the Saints. You mentioned Baker Mayfield. You mentioned the momentum that we thought they could carry over from the Cleveland game. I feel Cleveland provides the perfect segue into the ugly. And look, I get it, Browns fans. You want to blame Joe Woods. You want to blame Cade York and your defense and everything else. This was a failure to execute right from the get-go. You can see the difference in how these teams are coached. You watch New England late in games, running backs are sliding down inbounds. Kareem Hunt runs out of bounds not once, but twice north of the 2-minute warning. Nick Chubb, a player that we saw, and I believe it was against the Houston Texans, breaks away, slides down at the 1-yard line, decides this is the game that he wants to go into the end zone. Cade York, of course, misses the extra point. You don't think it's a big deal when you're up 13, but the only way you lose that football game is by giving the ball back to the Jets, and the improbable unfolded as such. This, in my opinion, Payne, is ugly because it's a direct reflection of being buttoned up and being able to control late game situations where the Jets never should have even had the football.
I saw the same thing you did. People want to fry defensive coordinator Joe Woods. They're calling for his job. That's easy if you don't understand the game. The Browns' clock management was horrific. This is 100% on Stefanski. It's 100% on Hunt and Chubb. Those trio have to be better. These are veteran backs. Kareem Hunt, as you mentioned, ran out of bounds twice late. Stay in bounds. The second time was the most egregious, going out of bounds at the 2:02 mark. It gave the Jets a fourth timeout. And then with no timeouts, Nick Chubb scores the touchdown. I mean, fall to the ground, the game's over. Stop running out of bounds. And honestly, on 1st and 10 from the 12 with 1:55 left, Jets don't have any timeouts. Why is Stefanski not having Brissett take elongated kneels, right? Like, I mean, we saw that in the Super Bowl with Patrick Mahomes where he's losing like 5-6 yards a pop. That seems pretty simple here, right? Like, just get the snap. I understand if you don't want to be in shotgun because you're worried about the snap, get Brissett under center, and then have him continue to drop back. As soon as a defender comes, then you take your knee. Kill more time. But that, to me, was veteran running backs not knowing the time and situation. That was a head coach not knowing the time and situation. Just horrific endgame management all around. The Jets should have never touched the ball.
Yeah, I mean, look, I get it hasn't happened in nearly 3,000 games where a team's able to erase a 13-point deficit with under 2 minutes to go. But you know how you continue to extend that winning streak? You don't give them the opportunity to do so. You play stupid games, you win stupid prizes, and the margin for error in the National Football League when you don't do things the right way manifested there. And suddenly in a division that doesn't look to be as dynamic as we thought, giving away a game like that could come back to haunt you once you get Deshaun Watson into the fold later in the season. As far as any...
We're in this time and this different time and age, right? Because everyone loves Nick Chubb. I think visually people believe he's probably the best player on the team. We're now in the fantasy day and age where, Chubb got us another touchdown and some yards. He can't be the guy to blame. We got to find somebody. It's got to be Joe Woods, and it's not him. It's certainly Stefanski and the two running backs. In terms of other stuff, what are you thinking for ugly?
I mean, do you want to attack the Raiders who took their foot off the accelerator because they thought a 20-0 lead at the half was insurmountable against an Arizona Cardinal team? Full marks to Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray. They turned it into a sandlot. Kyler Murray scrambled around what felt like 37 minutes in the pocket in those drives in plus territory, specifically in the red zone. But if you're the Raiders, I mean, what are you doing in this game? You move the ball at will. Derek Carr has north of 200 yards passing in the first half, and suddenly you forget to keep your foot down and pile on in the second half. I mean, again, inexplicable to blow this kind of lead in the fashion that they did it. And for Raiders fans, it had to feel even worse because you get the stop in overtime, you get the ball back, and you think you're going to have a chance, and Hunter Renfrow fumbles on back-to-back plays, and it's a scoop and score that leads the improbable comeback and gets Arizona to the window, not only to cover the number, but to win outright, extending one of the more ridiculous streaks in the league, where they've now won and covered 8 straight, I believe, as a road underdog.
I'm just not a Josh McDaniels guy. Never have been. Heard the horror story that transpired in Denver. I was surprised by that hire. And I'm semi-close to that situation. Now, it's 2 games. I'm not going to overreact. You play the Chargers on the road. You're an underdog. Obviously, that's a very tough situation. And if you glance on the surface, it looks like the Raiders played competently on offense. But the second half, to your point, was just abysmal. The Raiders went into a shell. They got themselves out of rhythm. In the second half and overtime alone, Derek Carr had a 28% passing success rate. Didn't convert a single third down in the second half. Negative 0.58 EPA per play in the second half and overtime. Devontae Adams apparently wasn't in the game plan. 1.7 yards per target. I don't know the equation of what that translates to when you look at his contract, but it's not good. The defense eventually wore down after being on the field for 59 plays in the second half and overtime. And then to cap it off in the second half, like the Raiders offense just gives the game away. And even when you don't have a dog in the race, we talked about some endgame variance that hasn't really swung our way. I wasn't really happy to see how that transpired with an under 9.5 Arizona Cardinals win ticket in my pocket. So that was not fun for me either.
No, absolutely not. And then the 2-point conversion, did he catch it? Did he not at the back of the end zone? The bottom line is this. If you're relying on the officials in replay review to overturn a call when you blow a 20-0 lead, which happened to be their largest franchise blown lead that we've seen from the Raiders. I mean, look, you can point your fingers every other direction, point them at yourself, look in the mirror, and realize that you allowed the Cardinals to hang around. And to Kyler Murray and Cliff Kingsbury, along with that Arizona defense's credit, they took the game from the Raiders. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You, of course, can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Payne, as we always do on Monday mornings, we look at some of the look-ahead line adjustments. And there weren't a ton this week, but a couple that were notable. And we don't have to spend a ton of time on any of these by any stretch. Kansas City, they were a 3-point favorite on the look-ahead price against the Colts. They end up coming back with a pretty impressive performance last Thursday night against the Los Angeles Chargers. Indianapolis goes down to Jacksonville and gets shut out 24-0, as you highlighted, as a 3-point favorite. It's rare that you can lay 3 in the NFL and not score more points than you're laying when you get put a goose egg. You're now looking at Kansas City, a 6.5-point favorite, a number that, who knows, could approach 7 if there's enough of a public push.
It's 7 a lot of places as we are talking about this now. The Chiefs won in spite of not playing their best ball on Thursday night, but you get the perception of that win. You have Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes now on a mini bye. We've seen what Andy Reid does with extra time. The Colts are a little bit beaten and battered. Let's see what that injury report looks like. Shaq Leonard, the leader of the defense, did get in full practices all of last week. I was a little surprised he didn't go. I would guess at 0-1-1. This is a spot where Shaq Leonard might be able to come in and help and contribute. It wouldn't stun me if we see the Colts in their home opener, backs against the wall, show some real fight here. If they can get the ground game going, it's a real possibility. That's quite a large movement there, Todd.
Monday Night Football, the New York Giants, 4-point favorites on a look ahead. They win against Carolina. Don't look great in doing so, but I think Dallas opened some eyes, winning outright as a 7-point dog. You see the Giants go from a 4-point favorite now onto the key number 3.
Yeah, I mean, the Giants got another win, but the Cowboys, I think, looked competent. Defensively, they will probably give the Giants' offensive line some trouble, so you're looking matchup-wise there as an advantage for Dallas's defense, I think. And then you saw Cooper Rush look more than competent at quarterback. He is at least willing. He's decisive. He's going to push the ball down the field. He's not the best quarterback in the world. It's obviously a drop-off from Dak, but he's at least willing to push the ball. He's at least willing to be decisive and figure out where the ball needs to go. And he did enough and looked competent enough, so it doesn't shock me, even though the Giants are starting 2-0, that this line's come down a little bit from the peak look ahead of 4.5 down to 3.
One other game that I didn't think we were going to talk about, but we probably should, given the overnight move that we saw. The Denver Broncos, 2.5, 3-point favorites. On the look-ahead number, you're now seeing that number down to pick 'em, as I alluded to, and one very prominent offshore shop has the 49ers actually a 1-point road favorite, and we didn't even really discuss some of the dynamics in play. I wanted to kind of save some of that for Thursday, but this is as much Denver looking ill-equipped and buttoned up, as we highlighted Nathaniel Hackett, and of course the 49ers going back to look a lot more like the team we saw in 2021 with Jimmy Garoppolo now taking the reins.
I think you said it perfectly. That's it in a nutshell. Denver has looked very poor. They probably lose that game if it's not an early season altitude game. You think about that Denver performance in the context of how dominant they've been at home the first 2 weeks of the season, when teams probably aren't in the best shape, and we see what those numbers look like. Denver has a massive home field advantage early in the season, and they still couldn't cover that number against the lowly Houston Texans. And so that gives you some concern. Nathaniel Hackett, as we alluded to, looks like he's in a little bit over his head. San Francisco, you don't want to say this while he's down and out, but in the short term, Jimmy G is an upgrade over Trey Lance. And that's also what we're seeing in this market. And you saw how the team rallied around Jimmy G. Did you see that?
Yeah, it's such an interesting dynamic in San Francisco because you hate to see that for any player. You never want injury. Trey Lance obviously devastated. His ankle spun around like Dak Prescott and Robin Ventura beforehand. But you can see that the 49ers just feel more confident when Jimmy steps into that huddle. The defense can be a little bit more aggressive. There were more deep shots on the drive. And that was with a game plan tailored for Trey Lance's skill set. So this is a 49ers team, I have to imagine on some level, Payne, and this is pure speculation because I'm not in the locker room, that believes what could have been last year has a chance to right itself now with Jimmy now the starting quarterback.
Now, he's not been a guy that's proven to stay healthy, so what transpires if that unfolds? But for the time being, That's why you're seeing this move. Denver, not just looking incompetent, but just early on in the season, learning a brand new system versus San Francisco 49ers team at 1-1 with a ton to play for, and we believe they've upgraded their quarterback, and I think odds makers are in line with our thought process as well.
Hey, if Jimmy misses some time, we're only 2 weeks away from Brocktober, so who knows what could happen in the Bay Area. We promised you guys a new segment, something that we've done in the past that we think adds a ton of value, not just for sports bettors out there, but gamblers alike. Hope you gentlemen and ladies enjoy.
Are you injured or are you hurt?
When injuries occur in the NFL, you need someone to call on.
If you're hurt, you can still play. If you're injured, you can't.
Let's check in with Dr. Deepak Chona, Stanford and Harvard trained orthopedic sports surgeon and founder of Sports Med Analytics, the industry leader in data-driven injury analysis.
So are you hurt or are you injured?
Thanks, Todd, and thanks for having me on today. I'm Dr. Deepak Chona. My background is as an orthopedic sports surgeon trained from Stanford and Harvard. I founded Sports Med Analytics realizing that we had room to improve in how we project return and performance after injury, and we've since become the industry leader in data-driven injury analysis. Now, I am very pumped to be here today with your Bet the Board injury update for Week 2. Starting with Trey Lance, obviously the big ankle fracture, it's a season-ending injury. It generally takes 4 to 6 months to get back to football, but in Trey Lance's case, I would expect a full recovery. Now, this is pretty similar to the injury that Dak Prescott had a couple years back, and you can see that Dak Prescott did sort of change his playing style to be a more pocket-centered player. That wouldn't be entirely out of the realm for Trey Lance as well, but from a physical perspective, I would expect a full recovery, including of his running abilities. Next up is Jerry Jeudy, wide receiver for the Broncos. We initially heard shoulder injury, and it looked like he came down pretty hard on that right shoulder, but post-game Coach Hackett was clarifying that it was actually to his ribs. So he got negative x-rays. That's a promising start, but we'll need more imaging tests to really get done today to know what exactly happened. And if he did injure his ribs, as Hackett suggested, then we're generally thinking about 2 weeks for that comeback. And the reason is that anytime he goes to raise his arms over his shoulder, that will cause a pretty significant amount of pain and limit the ability of a wide receiver in general to catch the ball. Next up, James Conner. Now, Conner left the game on Sunday with an ankle sprain. The mechanism on video looked pretty classic for a low ankle sprain, and the fact that he was on the sideline testing it out, taping it up, and trying to get back in the game suggests overall a low severity one. And those average about a week for running backs to get back in the game. They often don't result in any missed games, and that would be my leading suspicion for James Conner as well. I suspect he'll be playing Week 3 without a whole lot of impact of the injury on his performance. Next up, J.K. Dobbins. Now, Dobbins looked like he could have been ready this week. He practiced in full all the way leading up to Week 2. The average time out, though, from his combination of injuries is actually 15 months. And remember, the typical ACL is closer to 9 or 10, but he had an additional ligament on the outside of his knee called the LCL that was injured. And he's now at about 14 months after that, into that recovery. So with Dobbins, we're looking probably at a guy who's going to be practicing in full all week this week as well. I think they'll start to get him some limited touches either Week 3 or Week 4. I don't expect them to give him a huge workload to start off, because then you risk what happened with Chris Godwin pulling the hamstring issue. And over the course of about 4 weeks, so looking at probably Week 6 or 7, those snap count limits should come off. But until then, I think you're looking at J.K. Dobbins in limited capacity over the next few weeks. Now, one thing to keep in mind in addition with Dobbins, with Sports Med Analytics, we put together large injury databases, and we factor in things like player demographics, and we use a combination of a machine learning algorithm and my own background in orthopedic sports medicine to really interpret what we learn. And what it tells us about J.K. Dobbins is that he fits the the profile of a player who is likely to bounce back a little quicker than the norm from a big injury like he had. So with J.K. Dobbins specifically, we're looking at about 85% of himself by the time the end of the season rolls around, which is a pretty good player considering he averaged 6 yards per carry before injury. And again, that should hit somewhere in the week 8 to 9 range, but it all depends on when the Ravens start that ramp up in his workload. Next up, Alvin Kamara. Now, he was borderline to play on Sunday, but of course was ruled out for the game. Not that surprising considering the rib injury. It's incredibly painful. It takes on average 2 to 4 weeks for most position players, but with the combination of protective padding and likely a numbing injection, I would expect him to be on the field for week 3. And as long as he's able to stay on the field, you wouldn't really anticipate too much of a performance impact. So watch the practice reports here because they'll tell a little more of the story, but most likely Kamara out there for week 3. Next up, George Kittle. He, again, a guy who was ruled out Sunday, day of the game. He was dealing with a grade 2 groin strain, and these average about 3 weeks out for most players. He sustained his groin strain early leading up to week 1. So putting him back in the field yesterday would have been a surprise, and the reason is that if you rush back, you can have a pretty high recurrence rate. It's 20 to 25% in the early weeks back. But we don't expect much performance impact there. It's usually about 10%. So in summary, I would expect Kittle to be back there on the field for week 3, about 90% of what his pre-injury production was. And do keep in mind that he has that 20 to 25% recurrence rate in the early couple of weeks back, but overall looking up for George Kittle. Next up, Justin Herbert. Now, we saw him in tons of pain on Thursday, and it made more sense once we got the reports of what actually happened. He has a rib injury to the cartilage in the rib area, and the fact that he is playing quarterback does work in his favor somewhat here, and in the sense that he is better able to protect himself and is less likely to take those big hits than an Alvin Kamara playing running back. Also working in Herbert's favor, besides the fact that he's huge and super tough, are the 10 days in between Thursday and his week 3 game. So the average timeline for quarterbacks for this injury is 2 weeks. He would still be ahead of that timeline if he comes back in the 10 days, but it's not unrealistic. And in Justin Herbert's case, look for him to test it out this week. I think we'll again see protective padding and a numbing injection to help him get through. And there's a decent chance that he plays on week 3. The odds would slightly go against it, but I would say there's around a 50% chance. Next up is TJ Watt. Now, he tore his pec week 1. People were initially talking about surgery, but he's now opted to treat it without. And he's on the IR, meaning he's going to miss at least 4 weeks. My anticipation for this would be closer to about 6 weeks before he's really coming back. And then once he does get back, it'll probably take him an additional about 2 weeks before he's really looking like himself. The good news is that muscle tears do heal reasonably well. As long as that tendon, which is what attaches the muscle to the bone, stays intact, which in this case, it seems that is what happened here. So by about week 10 to 12, I think TJ Watt is looking back to most of what he was pre-injury. Next up is the linebacker who the Colts desperately need back, Shaquille Leonard. He had back surgery a couple months ago, and he also had some calf and ankle issues, and that is probably really what's delayed his recovery. From the most common back surgeries in linebackers, we would expect a full recovery. He's past that 3-month point where that's sort of the acute recovery phase that we would recommend for most players. But again, because he's had a little bit of a prolonged course, I think they're going to work him back into the mix pretty slowly. Look for him to get some practice, full practices with pads in in this week and next week. And I think you're looking at a week 4 to 5 return probably for Shaquille Leonard. And that's all for today. Again, thanks for having me. I'm Dr. Deepak Chona with SportsMed Analytics. Pumped to be bringing you your Bet the Board injury update all season long. Be sure to hit me up on Twitter at SportMDAnalysis and Instagram by searching SportsMed Analytics. We'll be here all season. Back to you guys.
I think it's official, Payne. After listening to that, I now realize since 2014, that may be the smartest individual we've brought on the podcast. He's got a degree from Stanford. He's got a degree from Harvard. I mean, Christ, I may have to go back at an MBA or something else along those lines to be able to keep up with the good doc.
I'm just surprised he'd come on a podcast with me on it. So very happy to have him here. He's going to make our podcast substantially smarter. And it's an element that we've wanted to incorporate into our Monday morning podcasts since we've started them. And we did have another gentleman that used to do that, got plucked off, but we saw you guys liked that segment. We saw how the space responded to that segment in a, monkey see, monkey do approach, and we felt that we were just looking for the right guy, and we believe we have him now.
Yeah, incredible stuff. Going to look forward to hearing his perspective on things each and every week. Obviously, you hope he doesn't have to highlight season-ending injuries like he did with Trey Lance, but his perspective on a player like J.K. Dobbins and what fantasy owners and Baltimore Ravens fans can anticipate T.J. Watt and what he may look like in his return to action, along with other players that have much more optimistic approaches and potential to impact games as early as week 3. All right, one final order of business here, and that, of course, is the Monday Night Football affair that we'll see in the late time slot between the Minnesota Vikings and the Philadelphia Eagles. We're looking at Philadelphia, a 2.5-point home favorite across the board. This number down a touch from 3, where you could have bet it on the opener initially. Did dip as low as 1.5 before you've seen a battle ensue in the market. And the total has seen two-way action as well. Opened as low as 48.5, 49, got as high as 50.5, even a 51, I believe. And we started to see some under money enter the equation today. It is officially being dubbed, at least for me, the Jalen Reagor revenge game. I'm not sure he'll have an impact in the contest whatsoever, but it's fun to talk about nonetheless. When you look at so many different narratives, neither the Vikings or Eagles have started 2-0 over the previous 5 seasons. Both teams last started 2-0 back in 2016, the irony being that neither team made the playoffs that season. The Eagles, they squandered a 38-21 lead, but unlike teams that we saw in week 2, actually held on for victory, 38-35, but were not able to cover the number. Minnesota boat raced the Green Bay Packers in their season opener 23-7. And Payne, I'm sure we're going to hear it from now until kickoff tonight. It's Kirk Cousins on Monday Night Football. He's an automatic go against, just 2-9 in his career. But for all of those Kirk apologists out there, he has now won back-to-back Monday Night Football starts.
I'm juiced for this game, and they become more intriguing when you know the market. Full-blown battle on both sides and total from respected groups and bettors, and it'll be fun to watch this unfold. In terms of Kirk Cousins turning into a pumpkin again in primetime, there's probably something to that, being a regimented human. But listen, he played for a losing organization in Washington. He caught a decent amount of the poor Mike Zimmer sample. And Zimmer hated Cousins because their personal beliefs didn't align, and he took it out on Kirk every single day at work. This just feels different with Kevin O'Connell. I mean, O'Connell immediately embraced Kirk Cousins seconds after the Super Bowl. And I think we have a much smarter offense and play caller. Right off the bat, you saw the change in philosophy we told you was coming. This is a pass-first offense. And despite being up double digits out of the chute against Green Bay, the Vikings were still the 11th most pass-heavy team over expectation. We expected Kevin O'Connell immediately changing the Vikings offense to feature its receivers. And we saw not just that, but how smartly O'Connell was moving Justin Jefferson around the formation so he couldn't be keyed on. 35% of Jefferson's snaps were out of the slot. 3% of them were in the backfield. He wasn't just lining up outside on one side of the field every single snap. And it worked. Early downs, 8.6 yards per play on first down for the Vikings last week. We also referenced the Vikings offense operating from these 3 wide sets and how that could be their new base formation and how you can disguise your run game from that formation a little bit better. And the Vikings finished second best in rushing success rate from those 3 wide sets. I was a little nervous coming into the season about one thing, and that was Kevin O'Connell not using enough play action, because that's what Kirk really likes, and we didn't see a ton of that with Stafford the year before when O'Connell was with the Rams. But what do good coaches do? They mold to their talent. 39% play action rate for Cousins in week 1 against Green Bay. 100% adjusted accuracy rate when using play action. 11.9 yards per attempt. You look at the Eagles defense, and not just week 1, but a little bit specific to this matchup, the Eagles defense was horrific stopping runs from 3 wide sets. And what I am hearing from guys much smarter than me that watch film is, based on how Jonathan Gannon runs his zone defense, it's very difficult for Philly structurally to stop 3 wide running plays. And let's see if that changes tonight. Jonathan Gannon runs his own defense. Vikings saw that last week against Green Bay. Unless the Vikings, or unless the Eagles front here just absolutely dominates. Now, Derek Barnett is out tonight, obviously. Or Jonathan Gannon throws an absolute curveball, changing his defensive scheme. The Vikings, I think, are going to have some success moving the ball here, just based upon the matchup that I see that they impose offensively. Just, they're much smarter, and the things that they want to do give this style of defense a little bit of trouble. Now, obviously, total's coming down a touch. The Kirk Cousins could turn into a pumpkin during primetime. We don't know, but at least schematically, there's some things here that lend itself to Minnesota having success offensively.
It was interesting to see the dichotomy that the Eagles created, albeit in his first game, how much easier the Lions found it to run up the middle when Jordan Davis wasn't on the field. Clearly, he's the kind of guy that's not going to be out there for 95% of the snaps, but fascinating development to keep tabs on there. And Payne, I can't resist. I have to take a shot at Bears fans who got into my mentions before the Green Bay Packers and Chicago Bears game, saying that Justin Jefferson's performance against Green Bay defense was scheme-driven. If that was the case, explain to me why Justin Fields was 7 for 11 against the Green Bay defense. So that's all I want to get out there for Luke Getsy and company, for folks that...
Well, that's great. After starting the season a little bit slow and having people at our neck, you decided to incite another fan base.
Hey, you know what? Sometimes that's what you got to do. Like I said, I don't sugarcoat the slow start to the season. We own our wins and losses around these parts, and we may address that later in the week, because we know the Boo Birds are out in full force, and I'm sure there are a lot of people trying to dance on our graves, but that's a different discussion for a different day. And yes, Bears fans should be excited about the team and the direction they're going, but Justin Jefferson is not a product purely of scheme. He may be the single best wide receiver in the National Football League. On the other side of the ball, you talked about it extensively, and I think people were surprised to hear it, that you thought the Vikings defense could take a major step forward this year, even without a defensive-minded head coach. And we saw some of that on display against Green Bay. I don't want that to be the main data point that we use, but obviously it's a lot different when you have Danielle Hunter out there on one side, Zadarius Smith on the other side. But can those two talented pass rushers be negated by a run-first offense that's not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 different Philadelphia Eagles score touchdowns? Jalen Hurts have success running the football, and more importantly, working in harmony with one of his longest-standing friends in A.J. Brown using RPO action.
I think that's probably why we're seeing some battling here. I think the scoreboard might be influencing perception of Minnesota's defense. And to your point, I do think the talent and the health is better from the onset. And I like the scheme a little bit better because it's that Fangio brand. But you're looking at a Vikings defense that only gave up 7 points, right? That's what the perception is on the scoreboard. Reality is they got bullied in the trenches some. And that was with the Packers down both their starting tackles. Green Bay actually had a 57% rushing success rate on the ground week 1. The Vikings defense was 31st in rush yards allowed before first contact, so not really penetrating, not really getting to ball carriers. Minnesota's secondary, I think, has some question marks that the Green Bay receivers couldn't really take advantage of. Lazard was out. Tanyan's first game back off an ACL tear. Watkins and Cobb are dust. Dobbs and Watson were a little bit in over their heads in their first game ever in that environment. The Christian Watson drop touchdown as he burns Patrick Peterson, I think, really distorts what could have been for the Packers offense. And all told, Packers hung 7, as I alluded to, but finished 13th in passing success rate against that Vikings defense, 4th in rushing success rate. So I'm not totally buying the Vikings defensive performance in week 1. We've also had a history here of the Vikings defense dipping in performance on the road when they get away from that noisy dome. That is one of the best home field advantages in all of football. Give up about 5 points more per game when hitting the road in recent years. There's some matchup advantages here that I like as well. The Eagles were the number 1 team in terms of rushing success rate when rushing from 3 wide sets. So that's important to think about when the Vikings could not stop the run last week. And even though the Eagles were successful running against the Lions, they were actually 12th in passing rate over expectation week 1. So they didn't completely go into their shell. Now, if you look at one thing that also could be leading to a little bit of a discrepancy here between betting groups on this total, if you look at Jalen Hurts' performance last year against man and zone, they were actually pretty even. But last week, Jalen Hurts saw the Lions, who play one of the highest rates of man and press in the league, and now you're going to get one of the complete opposite approaches tonight with Ed Donatel with his zone defense. The Vikings played zone week 1 at a top 5 rate, so that means eyes on the quarterback. When you're in man coverage and you're playing press, typically your back is to the quarterback because you're following those receivers. So it does help, I think, a little bit to contain Hurts' legs if your eyes are on him. So you might see Hurts having to rely a little bit more through the air, or just the typical handing off the ball up the middle where they're a little bit soft. So I do think there's some matchup advantages for both offenses. I think that'll be ultimately the cat and mouse here. But if Hurts can make enough plays through the air, the Philadelphia Eagles should also have some success offensively.
This was a game when you looked at the schedule when it came out before the year that you thought could be a pretty interesting look at 2 teams that feel that they can move into that upper echelon in the NFC, a conference that appears wide open other than, of course, probably the Bucs and the Green Bay Packers to some extent. This will go a long way in determining, hey, look, here, this is what Philadelphia is going to be. They have their quarterback that they can rely on to win games of this magnitude. And for the Minnesota Vikings, we talked about it last week. They found separation. They were able to keep their foot down against a division rival. What better way than to follow it up here against Philadelphia, knowing they'll have a short week to prepare for the upstart Lions next Sunday. So it should be an outstanding game to watch, and one that you'll be able to pick up about an hour after the first Monday Night Football game kicks off between the Tennessee Titans and the Buffalo Bills. If you're looking for a breakdown on that matchup, encourage you to go back to the Thursday podcast, broke that thing down extensively, talked about some of the battles that we saw in the betting market there, why that number cascaded from 7 to 10, and also sharing why you might see a little bit of under money that has since surfaced, taking the total from a peak of 51 down as low as 47.5. All right,
it is time-stamped as well.
Yep, it's right there for you. You can go into Apple Podcasts. You can go to the website. Everything is right there. You don't have to listen to the rest of the show. Get the breakdown there if you happen to miss it on Thursday. Anything else that you would like to add before we close up shop here this fine Monday and go back into the lab before we resurface for the college football podcast on Wednesday?
Back to work.
Back to work it is. Want to thank all of you, our loyal listeners, for tuning in. We understand that this is a space flooded with content. The results haven't been what we wanted for the best bets, but it shouldn't discourage you from taking away from the content that's out there, all the nuggets, the tidbits that will inevitably get us to the window more often than not. Best of luck with all of your investments on this tandem of Monday Night Football games. We'll be right back with you on Wednesday for a deep dive of the college football card. And in the meantime, hopefully we'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.